concept of neuroplasticity fundamentally reshapes how we understand mental strength. For decades, it was assumed that the brain, once developed, remained largely static in its structure. But neuroscience now confirms that the brain is a dynamic, adaptable organ that reshapes itself through experience, repetition, and focus. This ability, known as neuroplasticity, allows us to intentionally rewire our patterns of thought, behavior, and emotional response. When you repeatedly engage in behaviors aligned with resilience, like focusing under pressure, controlling your reactions, or practicing calm in chaos, you begin to rewire your neural circuits toward becoming more mentally tough. In other words, your identity as a mentally strong individual is not a fixed trait. It's a trainable skill. Every decision you make to resist distraction, every time you push back against negative self-talk, you're literally reshaping the physical structure of your brain. Neural pathways that support focus, discipline, and courage grow stronger with repetition, while pathways related to fear, hesitation, and avoidance weaken. The implications of this are profound. You are not doomed to be reactive, anxious, or fragile simply because that's how you've operated in the past. Through structured practice and consistent intention, you can teach your brain to handle stress differently, think more clearly, and respond with greater control. This rewiring process is not theoretical, it's biological. When you engage in repeated mental training, your brain's synapses fire more efficiently. Myelination, the process by which neural pathways are insulated to conduct impulses faster, increases in the circuits you use most. That means the more you practice mental discipline, the faster and more effortlessly it becomes to access that state. You go from reacting impulsively to responding strategically, from being easily overwhelmed to being composed under pressure. The more consistent your efforts, the more permanent these changes become. Repetition isn't boring, it's how transformation happens at the cellular level. Identity itself is shaped by what your brain expects of you. If you've always quit under stress, your brain builds a model of you as someone who avoids discomfort. But if you start showing up differently, leaning into effort, delaying gratification, controlling your responses, your brain updates its model of who you are. That's not philosophy. That's the prefrontal cortex communicating with deeper limbic systems, rebalancing the hierarchy of your behavior. You begin to identify not as someone who reacts to life, but as someone who responds to it with precision and control. Neuroplasticity doesn't work instantly. It's not a motivational trick. It's a physiological law that rewards consistency. There will be resistance at first, but that resistance is not a sign to stop. It's the signal that change is beginning. Each repetition is a vote for the person, and over time, the new identity takes hold, not through force, but through frequency. Becoming mentally unbreakable doesn't require that you never feel fear, doubt, or fatigue. It requires that you train your brain to operate despite them. That is the core power of neuroplasticity, the ability to become who you choose to be by teaching your brain how to think, feel, and act in alignment with stress. In its most basic form, is not an emotional state, but a biological response. The body's signal that something in the environment requires attention, adjustment, or action. From a neurological standpoint, stress is processed through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, which rapidly activates the release of cortisol, adrenaline, and other hormones that prepare the body for a challenge. This stress response is not inherently negative. It evolved to enhance performance under pressure. The mistake many people make is interpreting stress as a threat instead of a signal. When stress is viewed as something to fear or avoid, the mind spirals into anxiety and paralysis. But when it is viewed as an indicator to focus, prepare, and take action, the same biological signals can fuel clarity and resilience. Reframing stress is not wishful thinking. It is about changing how the brain and body interact with challenge. The amygdala, which governs emotional responses, can be trained through experience and awareness to reduce overreaction, while the prefrontal cortex learns to maintain logic and perspective even under pressure. Understanding that stress is information, not danger, shifts your mindset from helplessness to strategy. High performers in any field, military, athletics, medicine, entrepreneurship, train themselves to operate in high-stress environments by interpreting those physiological signals differently. Their heart rate goes up, their palms sweat, their breath quickens, but instead of seeing this as a breakdown, they see it as readiness. That reframing changes everything. It puts the brain into a forward-leaning posture. It activates dopamine systems linked to motivation and learning, allowing them to grow stronger with each exposure to controlled stress. Like a muscle, stress tolerance grows through use. Avoiding it weakens your ability to handle it. Embracing it in measured ways teaches your nervous system that difficulty is manageable, even beneficial. Practical tools can accelerate this adaptation. Breath control, for example, is one of the fastest ways to modulate your nervous system's response to stress. Controlled exhalations activate the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing heart rate and cortisol and bringing the brain back to a state of clarity. Movement, especially rhythmic or resistance-based, also helps regulate neurochemistry and improves cognitive function under pressure. These are not lifestyle hacks. They are tools grounded in hard biology that teach your body to perceive stress differently. One of the most powerful mental shifts comes when you begin to see stress as training. Each stressful moment becomes a neural opportunity, an event where the brain is learning how to perform under pressure. This outlook transforms adversity into adaptation. Instead of collapsing under stress, you begin to operate through it, knowing that each moment you persist, your mental circuits grow stronger. This mindset does not eliminate pressure or difficulty, but it ensures that those experiences shape you rather than shake you. Ultimately, stress is not the enemy. It is the teacher. Your ability to become mentally resilient begins with how you interpret the signals your body sends during challenge. If you train your brain to see stress as a call to sharpen focus and elevate performance, you stop being afraid of it, you stop avoiding it, and over time, you become the kind of person who doesn't just survive pressure, but performs because of it. Confidence is often mistaken for a personality trait or something you're either born with or not. But neuroscience tells a different story. Confidence is a neurochemical process, and it is highly trainable. At its core, it's about how your brain evaluates and responds to challenges based on past experiences and current internal chemistry. The neurotransmitter dopamine plays a critical role in this equation. Dopamine is not just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of motivation and reward. When you set a goal, take action, and make progress, even small progress, your brain releases dopamine. That release signals to your nervous system, this is working, keep going. Over time, this feedback loop builds a sense of internal certainty. You start to associate effort with success, and the result is a stronger, more stable foundation of confidence. Cortisol, on the other hand, is the hormone released in response to stress and uncertainty. It serves a survival function, preparing your body to respond to threat. But chronically elevated cortisol can impair cognitive performance, suppress motivation, and create a sense of self-doubt. The key to long-term confidence is learning to manage and balance these two forces, increasing dopamine through action and progress, while managing cortisol through regulation and recovery. You can't control every situation, but you can control how you approach it. When you break a task down into smaller, actionable steps and execute consistently, you keep your dopamine flowing and prevent the overwhelm that spikes cortisol levels. That's not just a productivity trick, it's a biological strategy for sustaining self-trust and confidence. Confidence also grows through exposure and repetition. When you put yourself in situations that stretch you slightly beyond your comfort zone and you survive or succeed, your brain updates its model of what you're capable of. This model, stored largely in your prefrontal cortex and reinforced by the hippocampus, becomes your operating system for future challenges. If you repeatedly step up, try, and move forward, even imperfectly, your brain begins to predict success instead of failure. That prediction becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not through magic, but through biochemistry and reinforcement. Your nervous system learns that discomfort is not danger, that effort is rewarded, and that you can rely on yourself under pressure. In contrast, avoiding challenge or collapsing under uncertainty floods the brain with cortisol, signaling that the environment is unsafe and you're incapable. This teaches your brain to fear the unknown and to associate effort with failure or threat. Over time, this leads to learned helplessness, a condition where you stop trying not because you can't succeed, but because your brain no longer expects that success is possible. Breaking that cycle requires deliberate effort. It requires you to re-engage with challenge, reframe failure as feedback, and rebuild the dopamine-based confidence loop. Every time you do something difficult, no matter how small, and push through, you send a chemical message to your brain, I can do hard things. That message rewires how you see yourself. In the end, confidence is a process, not a gift. It is the biological consequence of a brain that has learned through experience and reinforcement that effort leads to progress and progress leads to power. The more you understand and work with your neurochemistry, the more consistent and unshakable your confidence becomes. Not based on ego or bravado, but grounded in the real, tangible knowledge that you can meet life as it comes. Training the mind to withstand stress, uncertainty, and adversity involves more than just reading or thinking differently. It requires subjecting the body and brain to controlled stress in real time. One of the most effective ways to do this is through deliberate cold exposure and other forms of discomfort training. These practices are rooted in biological reality. When you expose yourself to cold, especially in a safe and structured way, like cold showers, ice baths, or breath retention exercises, you activate the body's stress response in a highly measurable form. The moment cold hits your skin, your sympathetic nervous system activates, your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, and your mind races. In that exact moment, you have a choice. React with panic or override that instinct with control. That decision, repeated over time, trains your brain and nervous system to manage discomfort, not fear it. This is a direct way of developing stress tolerance at the neural level. Cold exposure is just one example. Other discomfort protocols, such as high-intensity exercise, prolonged fasting, deep breath work, or extended silence and solitude, all work by applying manageable stress in ways that teach the brain a new relationship with discomfort. Instead of interpreting stress as a threat, your brain begins to register it as a challenge, a signal to focus, not to flee. What's happening under the surface is a shift in the neural pathways that process fear, anxiety, and control. Your amygdala, which is responsible for emotional reactivity, gradually becomes less hypersensitive. At the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, becomes more active during stress. The result is a calmer, clearer, more deliberate response to external pressure. There is also a hormonal adaptation that takes place. When you consistently engage in discomfort training, your body begins to regulate cortisol more efficiently. You don't stop producing stress hormones, but you stop being overwhelmed by them. Your baseline stress levels lower, recovery improves, you experience surges of adrenaline or challenge, but your return to equilibrium is faster. This increased autonomic flexibility, your ability to switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic modes, is one of the clearest markers of mental resilience. People who train discomfort regularly tend to have stronger heart rate variability, HRV, more stable moods, and sharper focus under pressure. Importantly, these discomfort protocols don't need to be extreme. The key is consistency, not intensity. Taking a cold shower for 1 minute each day, pricking through the final few reps in a workout, practicing stillness and boredom, or controlling your breath during anxiety, each of these trains the nervous system just enough to build resilience. What matters is the signal you send to your brain. This is hard, but I can stay. Over time, those moments accumulate. They create a new mental script, one of courage, presence, and adaptability. By deliberately training discomfort, you inoculate your nervous system against panic. You build a tolerance to volatility. Life will always bring uncertainty, pain, and challenge, but by choosing controlled adversity on your terms, you prepare for uncontrolled adversity on life's terms. You become someone who doesn't just survive pressure, you are forged by it. This is not about punishing the body or proving something to others. It's about developing a deeper mastery over the self. You realize that resilience isn't a reaction to the world. It's a relationship with discomfort that you've cultivated from within. The ability to control where your attention goes is one of the most powerful tools in developing mental strength. Attention is not just a mental habit, it is a biological mechanism that shapes the architecture of the brain itself. Neuroscience has shown that the brain changes in response to repeated focus. Whatever you consistently pay attention to, your brain assumes is important, and it begins to allocate more resources toward it. And this is known as experience-deprecate plasticity. If you continuously attend to distractions, fear, or worst-case scenarios, your neural pathways adapt to prioritize those signals. You become more sensitive to chaos, more reactive to uncertainty, and more vulnerable to external control. On the other hand, if you train your attention to focus on goals, solutions, and present moment awareness, your brain builds stronger neural networks for clarity, control, and composure. In this way, attention doesn't just reflect your mindset, it sculpts it. Controlling attention is a skill, and like all skills, it can be trained. One of the first steps is becoming aware of where your attention goes by default. Many people operate in a reactive mode, constantly shifting their focus based on environmental stimuli, notifications, noise, news, or emotional triggers. This scattered focus creates mental fatigue and weakens the brain's ability to prioritize what truly matters. Over time, it leads to a brain that is fragmented and emotionally unstable. In contrast, training yourself to direct attention deliberately, such as through breathwork, meditation, or even focused physical activity, enhances the function of the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, emotional regulation, and long-term planning. This part of the brain becomes more active and dominant when you practice sustained attention, allowing you to think with more clarity under pressure. The brain has a filtering mechanism called the reticular activating system, RAS, which acts as a gatekeeper of attention. It allows through the information that aligns with your goals and beliefs while filtering out the rest. When you set clear intentions and reinforce them with action, your RAS begins to prioritize inputs that support your mission. You start noticing opportunities you would have missed before. You become more efficient, more precise, and more confident, not because the world changes, but because your brain is now attuned to what you've trained it to seek. This is why journaling, goal setting, and visualization are effective. They are not just motivational exercises, but neurological commands that program the RAS to favor strength over fear. In high-pressure environments, those who maintain control over their attention are the ones who stay composed. The battlefield, the boardroom, the operating table. These are all arenas where distraction can be dangerous. The mind that can hold its focus amidst noise, that can resist being hijacked by fear or chaos, is the mind that leads. Mental strength, therefore, is not just about how you feel, it's about what you choose to focus on. If you can direct your attention, you can direct your actions. And if you can direct your actions, you can shape your outcome. Training attention is also a form of psychological self-defense. In a world where your attention is constantly being pulled, sold, and manipulated, regaining ownership of it is a radical act of strength. You stop being reactive to what others demand and start being intentional about what you pursue. Over time, you build a deep reservoir of focus and self-trust. You become harder to distract, harder to derail, and harder to manipulate. You become the kind of person who does not get mentally fragmented under pressure, but remains anchored and clear. This is not a personality trait, it's a practiced discipline. Attention is the gateway to everything you want to build mentally, and once you control it, you are well on your way to becoming mentally unshakable. Mental strength is not forged in a single moment of heroic effort. It is the result of a carefully constructed system that you engage with every day. Many people wait for motivation or a crisis to test their resilience, hoping they'll rise to the occasion. But neuroscience and behavioral psychology show that consistent systems are far more reliable than occasional surges of inspiration. The brain is highly responsive to routines, structure, and predictability. When you implement systems such as morning rituals, focus blocks, deliberate recovery, and emotional regulation strategies, you train your nervous system to operate with stability under all conditions, not just favorable ones. These systems automate mental strength, turning intentional habits into unconscious default modes. This frees up cognitive resources for higher level thinking and allows you to navigate pressure without being overwhelmed. One of the most foundational systems is a structured morning routine. When you begin your day with intentionality, whether that's light exposure, movement, focused breathing, or goal setting, you prime your brain for alertness, focus, and motivation. The first 90 minutes of your day set the tone for how your prefrontal cortex will process information and how your limbic system will interpret stress. If your mornings are chaotic, reactive, and overstimulated, your brain is already entering survival mode before the real challenges even begin. But if your mornings are controlled and proactive, your mind learns that it can steer the day rather than be dragged by it. Another critical system involves managing your environment. Your brain is always in conversation with the space around you. Visual clutter, noise pollution, negative media, or emotionally draining people all contribute to increased cognitive load and cortisol release. Designing your environment to support focus, minimal distractions, purposeful aesthetics, empowering language, and even subtle cues like clean spaces or goal reminders creates a feedback loop that reinforces clarity and control. Over time, this kind of environmental programming teaches your brain that it is operating from a base of safety and readiness, not chaos or conflict. Recovery is also part of the system. Mental toughness doesn't mean pushing non-stop. It means knowing when and how to recharge so that your nervous system doesn't become dysregulated. This includes quality sleep, controlled breathwork, periods of deep rest, and intentional disengagement from stimulation. When recovery is built into your system, you teach your brain that stress is a cycle. It rises and falls, and that it's safe to come back to balance. Without recovery, stress becomes chronic, mental resources deplete, and emotional volatility increases. The most resilient individuals don't just train hard, they recover with the same level of precision. Emotion regulation is another system that separates reactive minds from resilient ones. This involves becoming aware of your emotional triggers, using cognitive tools to reframe negative thoughts, and applying physiological regulation techniques like breath control or mindfulness. These aren't abstract ideas. They are brain training protocols that strengthen your ability to stay steady under stress. With repetition, your emotional responses become less impulsive and more intentional. You stop reacting blindly and start choosing your state. Ultimately, becoming mentally strong isn't about being tough once. It's about building an operating system that makes strength your default setting. That means embedding strength into how you begin your day, how you manage your inputs, how you process emotion, how you focus your mind, and how you restore your energy. Each system works like a scaffold, supporting the mind during pressure, amplifying clarity during complexity, and creating a sense of internal safety even when the external world is unstable. Over time, these systems form your mental fortress. They make you the kind of person who doesn't need to hope for mental strength because you've already built it into the structure of your life.